In this video, I'm going to be making one of these trees that you can use for action figure dioramas or toy photography. I'm using the hot wire foam cutter to cut this 2-inch thick piece of styrofoam down to 2 inches by 2 inches, or roundabouts. If you don't have a 2-inch piece of styrofoam available, you can glue two 1-inch boards together to get the same thickness. I'm trying to use the hot wire cutter here to kind of round the corners off, but I switched over to a handheld hot wire and now sanding. There's a lot of sanding in this process. You should have a dust mask on if you're sanding, and open windows, some ventilation is good. So I switched over to my knife to use for this part. Only use a knife if you're comfortable with it, but cutting foam is pretty easy. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it, so lots of sanding. Let me just move this air filter a little closer. Ever since I bought this little electronics vacuum for cleaning out my PC, I've been using it for everything. It's great for foam dust, and if you want to get a little more life out of the sandpaper or just ungunk it, this works really, really great. Hello. Oh, mask is mandatory, but apparently shirt isn't for some reason. It's funny, but I often have to remind myself, John, you're about to start filming. You should probably put clothes on. Using some of the scrap I had laying around, and we're just going to cut this up and make all the little roots, or I don't know, I guess you would just call them roots, at the base of the tree. Usually I make somewhere between 4 and 5 of them. Trying to get them to fit correctly against the base of the tree is probably the trickiest part, but it's really not that big of a deal. You can always cut them down, sand them to shape it, and even if it doesn't fit perfectly, or if there's a gap or something that you're not happy with, you can always just glue it in there and fill that with some moss later on in the process to kind of cover anything that you think looks not as good as you would like. I'm gluing this together using hot glue. But you could use hot glue, white glue. I use a lot of Aleene's tacky glue as well. But for this process, I wanted it to be dry really quick for the video, so just using hot glue here. Wanted to get the top a little bit more flush. Sometimes I would use the hot wire table for this, but I just went ahead and sliced it with the box cutter. I'm using a black pen here to just kind of draw in where I'm going to cut everything. Sometimes you don't want to use black pen. Pen kind of repels paint, so that line is going to show up if you don't cut it out. Even if you put 3, 4, 5, 6 coats of paint, that line will really want to persist and keep showing up. But for this, it's not a problem. Also, if you're using the line for a deeper part of the object that would normally be filled in with black paint or shadow, the line just becomes part of that and looks okay. But anywhere else where you have a line, especially if it's a lighter color paint you're using it with, it's going to really be difficult to cover up without putting something over it or just cutting that piece of foam off later. Carefully carving around the top here with this knife. Adding little details. You can do as much of this as you want. Trying to clean up some of the fuzzies, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I always like to add a few of these splits at the top just for a little character. There's many different styles you could do this in, but I just decided, just to make it simple, cartoony. That's kind of usually what I do with these, and just draw some rings on the top. And I was having a really hard time here drawing these rings. The angle I had to hold this while using the camera was a little bit different than I'm used to. Here I'm going to make a branch for the tree, just a little embellishment so it's not just a straight trunk. For the texturing on this tree, I'm just using a dulled pencil. There's lots of different methods. You could use a wire brush, you could use a pen or the pencil to kind of draw the lines on that you wanted in a certain pattern. I'm very loose with this, and I played part of this in real speed because I just wanted to show you how quickly you can move and still get a result. It doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's up to your personal preference, but I find if you're just kind of flowy with it, it really doesn't look that bad. Even if some of the lines cross because you think that they shouldn't cross, it doesn't look that bad because you're really trying to put a texture down instead of drawing. So if there's like some randomness to it, it all just kind of goes together. And I draw my pencil. Here's what the texture looks like finished up. Sometimes I'd add some wire brush to this, but it's not really necessary, so I didn't here. I'm using just a plain black base coat for this. Sometimes I'll use Mod Podge mixed with black. A lot of people do that, but it's just not really necessary for everything. This isn't going to be touched a lot, and I'm not putting anything on it, so I'm totally okay with using just plain black for the base coat. Using a burnt umber for the first bit of color in here, just going to dry brush it on there, not going to be too careful with it really. For this layer, I'm using a honey brown. So for this lighter part, I just mixed up some of that same honey brown paint with a little bit of like I don't know what color it is, a cream color of some kind. Normally I'd use a detail brush for this, but I had this smaller flat right here, so this is what I used. But you always want to use a smaller brush when you're trying to paint smaller details. It's pretty obvious, but I've seen people try to use a giant brush to paint really tiny details and then wonder why they were struggling with it. It's pretty obvious when you think about it, but you might not think about it. Adding a little bit of green here and there. I think it's avocado green, just a little here and there. Now I'm using Mod Podge to paint on here and there, and we're going to put flock with the Mod Podge. Now I like Mod Podge for this because I find it really easy to brush on. It's not as thick as like white paint. White glue. It's not as thick as white glue. Mod Podge paints on really easy with a brush, so you can get all these different patterns on there, and I like that. Adding our flock. I always tap it down. I don't know if you have to, but I always do that. Make sure you have a nice piece of newspaper or something underneath there to catch the flock, because you're going to want to save all the extra that falls down. Because that stuff could get pretty pricey, because you end up spilling a lot of the extra stuff onto the table you're working on, because just a lot of it, by the way it works, falls off whatever you're using it on. Can I speak? I think I can speak. This is 1:48 in the morning. I should have done this earlier. Okay, so here we have all of our extra flock saved up, and we're just going to put that back in the bag as much as we can. And save that for another day. So here we have the finished product of what I'm doing here. Now you can add a little bit of Mod Podge watered down in a spray bottle over this flock, so it won't fall off as easy. It'll harden it down, and that really does help preserve it for a much longer period if you're going to be touching it a lot. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that, and take care.